Good morning. I think I should start with Rabbit. Welcome. It's Thursday, February 1st, 2024, a little after 9, and we are resuming our work on S213, Act relating to the regulation of wetlands, river corridor development, and dam safety. And wanted to look this morning at a proposal for possible language to add to the bill based on work by Mason Overstreet and others. So I'd like to start with reminding Mr. Overstreet to join us at the table.
And Julie.
Sure, if it's okay, I'd like my colleague Julie Silverman, our Lake Champlain Lightkeeper.
Absolutely. Welcome, Ms. Silverman. Sorry, I didn't know you were gonna tag team it. You're always welcome to pull up 2 chairs.
Thank you.
Make one in from the side.
Over.
Over. Smashed.
Sorry.
Not that.
Let's get to the basics.
Probably edible.
Start with.
Everything's nice.
These must be forever spent.
Good one. It's never.
Kind of like.
Take a minute. Like,
Well, things you can't buy.
this isn't sand transportation.
I think it should be up to.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I do not good.
Oh, you got it. Oh, okay, go back. Yeah. I just text,
Yeah. Thank you for that opportunity. Huzzah.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Senator Bray, Chair Bray, and senators. Really great to be here. For the record, my name is Julie Silverman. I am the Lake Champlain Lake Keeper for the Conservation Law Foundation, which also means I'm part of the International Waterkeeper Alliance. And I'm here today to sort of share my experiences and connect what's been happening in Lake Champlain and Vermont to a broader picture with climate change. And as you can see, it's about plastic foam, and I want to sort of start off by saying that CLF is in full support of S213 to start with, and we want to sort of connect what's been happening and the work that we've done with this legislation.
I'll just quickly
Yep.
introduce myself. Chair Bray, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on S213 and our recommendation of inclusion of the following language regarding plastic foam pollution. I'm Mason Overstreet. I'm a staff attorney with the Conservation Law Foundation, and I work very closely with Julie, our Lake Champlain Lake Keeper.
Well, and I'll just throw in a little side note. We worked a lot on reducing single-use plastics. We also at the same time took styrofoam containers out the mix, and so although those were meaningful, modest steps, where I think that whole process made us aware that problematic plastics are ubiquitous, and there's things we can do to increase the programs in the state to help us reduce more and more of that exposure.
Yes.
Yes, great. So that's exactly what we're here to talk about today. It's a huge issue. Just gonna see. There we go. So a lot of the work that I've been doing is really connecting, and I am the eyes and ears of the watershed. That's what a waterkeeper does, sort of like the Lorax for the lake, because we're gonna joke around that the water can't speak for itself, but I'm out there almost every day, even when the snow's flying, documenting what's going on in our waterways. And for example, this is a photograph of the Winooski River. This particular one is right at the Hydro One Dam Falls, and you can see all of the debris in the water. So we have a huge issue with plastic debris and other kinds of debris entering into our waterways. It's a huge issue related to climate change, and as you all know, we've been experiencing these dramatic shifts in our weather. From when I was a kid growing up on Lake Champlain, we didn't ever really think about anything but a January thaw. And okay, so we didn't, ice skate outside for a week, and then it would go back to winter again. And that we know is not the case anymore. And what that means is on the water, we have extreme wind, extreme waves, and I'll tell you about it. I canceled a lot of boat trips because of those extreme wind waves. Huge fluctuation in water levels, and you know that with all the flooding that we've seen. And we also have what people sometimes don't talk about is this driftwood and ice and sort of the battering around impact of all of this debris coming into our waterways. Is a really big problem for any kind of structures that we have in our lakes, ponds, and rivers. Just more examples, in case you haven't really gotten a sense of just how bad it is, we know that's Winooski Fall, that was, the July flood. And that's again, all this debris that you're seeing in those images that is plastic. There's a propane tank in the bottom, there's a little like oil can, that is all foam, we see plastic bottles. And more debris, I've even seen a huge packing billet that was a plastic container that was probably 6 feet by 5 feet by about another 2.5 feet. Shipping container type cargo material coming down this exact location. And I recruit volunteers and we pull out all this debris out of Lake Champlain, and that's the picture of one of my volunteers helping me pull out a car seat out of Lake Champlain that my heart sunk the first time I saw it when I was paddling. Because I thought that in fact there might have been somebody in it after the July flood, it's just terrific. So all of this debris, the plastic debris, a good percentage of the debris that we have. My colleague Ashley Sullivan, who wasn't able to testify today, but she submitted her documentation and data. They've been tracking for years all of the different kinds of debris that ends up in our waterways. And foam and microfoam is about half of that type of debris. And these are images, and I'm just gonna sort of hold this up and share this with you. Mason suggested I take it out of the plastic. I'm gonna put this in the middle of the table. I didn't want it breaking up in your copy. So this, and I'll pass these around. These are also contained in my recycled spice containers. And those are all different types of foam. We also call it, the technical word is expanded polystyrene, also known as styrofoam. And as you know, you've talked about Act 69 eliminating the food service EPS foam, expanded polystyrene in food service containers, but we have this foam breaking up in all sorts of other places. And we've been putting that foam in as dock flotation unprotected. And it might have worked, my grandfather's father, all that, it might have worked a little, back then when things were predictable. But climate has really changed what happens. And it's not very durable, it's very brittle, and that's why I didn't want to take it out of the bag. I didn't want to contaminate you all with it.
And Julie, if I could, one thing I would add here for the committee is that, you may be asking yourself or scratching your head, what is the connection to S213? Wetlands, river corridors, dam safety. Here's the connection, just as Julie discussed, with climate change, increased storm frequency, increased marine debris. One of the major sources of that marine debris is in fact dock foam, which we're going to discuss, or flotation foam. And that is the result of climate change. And so that's the connection to S213.
And I'm sure you saw a lot of docks get taken.
Absolutely, they're breaking up more and more, and literally derelict docks were broken away from people's properties and floating around in Lake Champlain and in other parts. And this has been an ongoing problem, and it's only getting worse. As Mason mentioned, it's a huge issue that we can see the data really clearly that the amount of debris has gone up dramatically as climate change and our flooding has increased.
Can you interpret what you just showed us?
Yes, absolutely.
Explain to us what.
Sure. Yeah, so all of the pieces in here are pieces of foam that were used to float a dock. And so when docks are on the water, we have a lot of legged docks in the state, but if water fluctuates a lot, like on the Champlain or in Memphremagog or other places, they need a floating one, so even like a swim platform. And the foam that's put underneath those, or used to be put underneath those, was not covered by hard plastic. And so it was just floated that big blue shelf.
Which
It's
is
just stuffed under, yeah. And so what we're trying to do is eliminate exposed foam from breaking down and being used as flotation for docks. because it's very brittle and imagine like an M&M when you put out a shell, you put the chocolate in the water and it
Yeah.
just dissolves and ends up all over the place. You put a shell on it and you got a little bit more durability. And that. For what? For a while, yes, it's not, and that's the problem. So all of these pieces, the pink, the white stuff, the blue stuff, all of these things are types of plastic foam that have been used in flotation that are broken up.
What was-
It ended up in our waterways.
What was the thing of the plastic?
That is a large piece of foam that broke off of a dock that I actually picked up off of Law Island, so just in the Broad Lake outside of Colchester. And that I do cleanups regularly on Law Island and it's just littered with foam. And we have, when the high water mark pushes debris up, it's called the rack line. And all of that foam and everything ends up in that rack line, and have been doing cleanups for decades and working with Roselia Project also to clean that up. And all of the samples is like foam, 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 and then more foam.
And that foam came, so the legislative language that we're recommending that the committee include in S 213 would prohibit, we will discuss this very shortly, but it would prohibit foam that is not encapsulated or does not have a plastic surrounding around it in order to prevent that. That foam came from a dock that did not have encapsulation. We should be mindful.
Yeah,
of
okay,
this
we'll keep going.
that
Yeah.
stuff.
So it's horrible for wildlife, that was the bird, it's been found in the entire food web. From micro and macroinvertebrates all the way up to fish and birds. It's in our wetlands, it's in our riverbanks, it's in our floodplains, it showed up everywhere in our waterways, the places that we wanna protect.
And it's a huge toxicity question. So is the plastic toxic in and of itself, or is it, I can't remember, it serves like a raft for bacteria and other things?
Both.
Okay.
Yes, all of the above. There are chemicals like styrene and benzene that are part of making plastic and a lot of different additives that are toxic. So it breaks down and it breaks up. But it never goes away. It's also an environmental justice issue. We're polluting the beaches where we know that more and more Vermonters need to go to cool off with our increasing temperatures with climate change. And that's a picture of Burlington Beach, typical day in the summer. Here's a better example, Senator, of what it looks like in situ. These are docks you can see from Connecticut and from Lake Champlain, that you just make these huge chunks and stick it on your wooden float and then make a dock out of it. And
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I assume you'll talk about this, but I see on the corner on the left, there's like a big barrel, like a blue barrel.
Mm.
Are we setting ourselves up for people using worse alternatives or like those, I mean, the DIY dock with the big blue barrels or whatever plastic tub thing they stick under there?
so it is sort of a lesser of two evil kind of conversation. I'll get to that. I have a whole alternatives chart, but thank you. That's a great question.
I would just respond quickly to say, the legislative language that we're proposing that pertains to repair of docks, I'm pretty confident that as drafted, it's robust enough to ensure that whatever is actually repaired or replaced is better than
Okay.
what's happening right now.
Okay.
The other thing I would add too is like, Julia, of course, works on Lake Champlain. This is a statewide issue. You're gonna hear from Pat Swazi. This is in all of Vermont waterways. So this is rivers, lakes, streams, the Connecticut River and Lake Champlain.
This is an example of one of those hard case floats, but it had loose fill in it and was spilling out. So there are alternatives. They can basically make one of those floats and then stick it in a steam bath and it hardens the foam into something more like a hard block. So it's less likely to spill out as individual little beanbag pellets.
And to really quickly pause on this, actually, just to go back, because that image is very helpful in that. So the legislative language, again, that we're proposing is extremely progressive on this issue in that it prohibits loose feed polystyrene, which is what you're seeing. So the encapsulation that the legislative language requires prohibits loose feed for this exact problem. When a dock gets cracked, the loose feeds fall out. It's actually, I mean, loose feed is of course more inexpensive for manufacturers to produce, but the common practice is to not have loose feed with encapsulation.
So what do you use?
Essentially foam that has been
Lost.
synthesized together, yes.
These are just images of breakages and really inferior repairs. And then I'm gonna turn this over to Mason and we can talk more about the alternatives and who's leading the charge on all these alternatives that are readily available. What we're talking about is a lot of antiquated, outdated products that are in the water that we know that there are alternatives currently on the market that are available to everybody, not just the retail, but consumer.
And we're on that, so
Yes.
of course, we'll have to talk to people who are in the business of making docks.
Yes.
Have you worked with those folks and have you, just interested in the kind of initial reaction you're getting, like, that's the direction we're going anyway, or, no, we really want what we've had?
So I've spoken with one of the largest retailers in the region, Dog Doctors. And in fact, when I've spoken with them, they're already under the assumption that there already was a law on the books prohibiting uncovered dog floats. They haven't been selling or using those in decades. And so this is really not an issue for them. And I've talked to them extensively and researched the product line that they use, and they use these encapsulated floats, hard plastic, and they're steamed solid on the middle, so they don't actually have this. It's sort of a tier of sort of how cheap do you wanna go, and then how more expensive, and products that they typically buy are not the low end. So that they were like, we don't even do that already, it's not.
Our understanding is the industry is selling what we're advocating for, so this should benefit the industry. It's the dilapidated, older, kind of DIY docks, which have foam like this example. So quickly, because of time, because it's very important, we believe that the committee hear from Bob Lapp and the president of Bob Lapp, Pat Swazi. But I'll quickly walk through the legislative language that we're recommending that this committee include or consider include in S213 is we believe that H373, which was a bill introduced last year by Chair Sheldon, which was extremely well designed, is the perfect template as far as legislative language and what the bill intends to do. And it does several things. One is, I will say at the outset, there's essentially a 2-year grace period in that legislative language to allow folks to come into compliance. I think the committee, and we would recommend that the committee hear from ANR. As of last year, the head of the Lakes and Ponds Division was fully supportive of this legislative language and bill. We worked very closely together on it. And it's our understanding that that person actually submitted a memo to file with the agency in support of this bill. As far as the interworkings of the bill, one, it prohibits the use of unencapsulated polystyrene or foam. So essentially it outright prohibits foam that doesn't have encapsulation, bearing in mind the 2-year grace period. 2 is it thoughtfully and progressively allows for the installation and repairs of docks, but it requires folks to come into compliance with encapsulation. So if one were to do a repair on their own dock, they have to use an encapsulated covered structure for that repair. 3 of it is that it does require proper disposal of docks that are not in compliance, like the example here. And then 4 is that it prohibits the sale and use of unencapsulated polystyrene. So again, foam that is not encapsulated. And also, as we mentioned earlier, the legislative language also prohibits the use and sale of loose bead foam. I'll say loose bead polystyrene. So that again is the structure that's encapsulated or enclosed, but has the loose bead foam like right here. We believe that's the best route for Vermont to go. There are other states and jurisdictions doing that, which we can discuss. And then lastly, there is an enforcement compliance schedule, which would go into effect 2 years in that grace period. And last but not least, this is included in the current language, and we believe it's necessary, but it would make basically the legislative language we're recommending would make unencapsulated polystyrene, it declares it a nuisance under Vermont law. So that if one, which there are there are quite a few derelict docks which are polluting Vermont waterways, and those would be declared a nuisance after a certain effective date. I think we can probably skip forward because it's important that we hear from Pat.
Yeah, so just, we're a little bit behind on this, we were leading the way in Act 69 and getting all that out of the food products, but we're a little bit behind and there's a lot of movement all over the United States about getting rid of the foam that's for foam flotation. And Connecticut River Conservancy also has been leading the way on this and had done a ton of work on it. And Mary Sullivan actually introduced a very similar bill back in 2019, and I had a long conversation with her about that. And we modeled this after some of the feedback from that bill.
Do the best.
It's great. And just so you know, also been working with the New York folks. And Judith Ank has also been working very closely with them from Beyond Plastics to get legislation in New York passed this session. And just about replacement costs, sorry.
Judith was part of she provided testimony when we did the plastic bag, or single-use plastic.
And Judith did say, we actively worked with her and have been in close communication on this particular issue. She said she would be willing to testify, she would be willing to submit testimony to the committee. She's very supportive of the bill.
Are there any issues around Vermont regulating when we get to waters that are not totally Vermont waters, for instance, Lake Champlain, the Mayog, Connecticut River?
This is interesting, the way, Chair, the way that the language is written as of right now is waters of the state. You know, this would be a question that we'd be interested to have with Legislative Council Michael O'Grady to figure out or determine the best, most suitable language. But as of right now, it is waters of the state.
I mean, could it be sad to skip Lake Champlain?
Yeah.
Is that a requirement?
Yeah, is the dock on the Vermont side of the Connecticut River, and the river is New Hampshire. Is the dock still a Vermont dock?
My
We have
understanding is
jurisdiction over it.
is yes, we would have jurisdiction over that if that dock were out of compliance, if the language that we're proposing went into effect and became effective after that grace period. There, it's my understanding A&R could reach out and enforce that dock if it were out of compliance.
There's a connected on the Vermont side.
Correct.
And since I have, I just want to make sure I understand, we were requiring encapsulation of big chunks as well as granular.
Yes, so
But then the granular, but we're still allowing the use of the granular?
this,
It's a cap-
as far as the interworking of the bill.
Yeah,
The bill, that's a great question. The bill technically would allow for loose feed polystyrene that basically is wholly encapsulated, but it would prohibit sale of. And that's the language that we had drafted as of right. Because I think one of the problems there would be a lot of constituents across the state who would say, I have an encapsulated dock, now I'm out of compliance, this can be very costly to come into compliance. Now I have to purchase a new dock that's encapsulated but does not have loose feed.
well, if it's encapsulated, why would it be in compliance?
Because it would be loose feeded encapsulation if it were cracked. So the problem would be like, if it were,
Oh, wait, okay,
Yes.
as long as it doesn't crack, you're okay,
yes.
all right.
So I think another way of putting that is that you could say those folks would be grandfathered in based on the language that's in the
Yeah,
draft right now.
what about peanuts?
Oh,
Styrofoam peanuts.
So they're not durable enough to be used typically as dock flotation, so that they're not manufactured that way.
They sink?
They don't sink, but they're not, people don't use them per se as flotation and you don't, so we're talking about also moorings. And buoy markers, like the picture you saw actually of the loon sign, the state wildlife is using unencapsulated flotation for their loon signs. So, yeah, so we're really trying to drive at is what's on the market, what do people currently use, and how do we eliminate that and bring that into a modern age? And that's a big part of it, but it doesn't specifically call out no packing cameras in this language.
Respectfully, I know we're over time, but I think it's important that the committee hears some from Pat Swazi, so I think we can.
So we will get that language and get copies for everyone so we can have it in front of us to start looking into it. Can you please, because we're trying to move to 13 by a week from tomorrow, can you please send a list of potential witnesses that we might want to hear from? For instance,
Yes.
doctors I know, but maybe others.
Maybe River Conservancy, I'd like to.
Yeah, so I mean, we're going to get some balance and including the harder one for me to find, other than doctors, is who's affected commercially and what kind of pushback we hear there.
Yeah.
Let's make sure that we're aware of folks who might like the idea conceptually, but be opposed to it for their own financial.
Absolutely. So Chair Bray, we will send a list of recommended folks who should testify on this.
Thanks very much.
Thank you again for
Thank
your
you.
consideration of
Thank
it.
you for bringing it. Extra points for bringing visual aid. And I think we should probably pass it back to.
Oh, I'll keep them.
They're not for breakfast if you.
Well, Senator McDonald, we left on your desk for a moment the very large phone piece, so you may
I think there's another.
see any. Ready?
It's encapsulated.
Oh, I'm not gonna stand over here.
Floating bridge.
Next, I was shared minds.
All right, since we are starting a little late, because we're Elkhart, where Mick Swazi was, as was I, and Senator McDonald. Good morning, thanks for coming to your second meeting in the morning already. And if you have, please introduce yourself to the committee again and just address you're aware of 373, which is the language we're thinking about incorporating into our bigger water bill. You could just speak to that, please.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Bray and committee for giving me a chance to speak to you. My name is Pat Swazi. I'm president of the Federation of Vermont Lakes and Ponds. The Federation is a statewide coalition of volunteer lake associations and individuals working to protect and preserve Vermont's lakes and ponds through education, outreach, and advocacy. The Federation supports the banning the sale and use of unencapsulated expanded polystyrene and open cell beaded polystyrene for docks and floats, and we support incorporating this ban into S213 as described by Mason just a few minutes ago. Such a ban will aid in flood resilience by providing better protection of water quality and reducing the pollution caused by heavy runoff and flooding of the state's waterways. As you have seen from the pictures that Julie just presented, there's a lot of polystyrene already in our lakes and waterways. However, we don't have to keep adding more. When Julie first talked to us at the Federation about this issue last year, I admit that I was astonished to learn that Vermont did not already have a law against the use of this material for docks and flotation devices. That there might be legacy uses would not necessarily be surprising, but the fact that to this day it can still be sold and used in our waterways is shocking. That this material cannot be recycled, breaks apart easily, is not biodegradable, is a petroleum-based product, and can kill fish and other wildlife if ingested seems like more than enough reason to ban it from the state's waters. Polystyrene is relatively fragile and brittle. You have probably maybe been sitting in a meeting, get a little bored and break off a piece of a styrofoam coffee cup and it starts to crumble in your hands and it crumbles into smaller and smaller bits and those bits stick to everything and just you can't get rid of it. Well, imagine that happening in the water. Only the pieces under a dock or a float are much larger than a coffee cup, as you have seen from what Julie has shown us and what she's got there. Over the years, it breaks apart, perhaps because it gets dinged by a boat, hit by a floating branch, gnawed on by fish. Pieces fall off, deteriorating into smaller and smaller bits that don't ever disappear, poisoning wildlife and potentially threatening human health. This issue becomes even more critical when we look at what our changing climate is doing to our lakes. The bigger and more frequent storms and flooding cause much heavier runoff, with more pollutants entering the waters. The runoff, the flooding, the debris, the high winds result in turbulence, and increase the incidence of damage to docks and floats, releasing yet more of this polluting material into the waters. Since these kinds of storms are seemingly inevitable, to make our lakes and other waterways more resilient, we need to decrease the pollution that will flow into them due to heavy runoff and flooding. A relatively straightforward fix is to remove materials that are in the water and that we know are polluting the water, such as this dock foam. We may not be able to stop the storms, but we can ensure less damage, faster recovery of lakes, and better protection of water quality by prohibiting the use of this material. A statewide ban on the sale and use of these types of polystyrene will also help to protect shorelines and adjacent wetlands. When this material breaks apart in the water, it doesn't just stay in the water, it spreads. And as it breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, it winds up due to flooding, as well as to just the natural movement of water, it winds up on the shorelands and adjacent wetlands. Often by the time it reaches these areas, it is broken down into such small bits that it is nearly impossible to find and remove. You've seen the pictures that Julie showed earlier. You saw the dock foam littering shorelines. What is hard to see are the tiny beads and microparticles, but they are there. We know they're there. We know they don't disappear. And they're not only in the water, they're on the shorelines. We believe that removal of this source of damage and pollution to the state's waters will better protect water quality, shorelines, and wetlands, and aid the state's efforts to develop flood resilience. It's also important that it be a statewide ban because water does not respect municipal boundaries. And we're hopeful with Vermont's leadership, it will encourage neighboring states to institute similar bans. As mentioned, New York is working on one as well, and that would be very helpful because, again, the water don't just stay in one state, they flow between the states. So to that end, we urge this committee to include language in S213 like that in H373, and Mason has laid out and outlined what that is, that will ban the sale and use of expanded polystyrene foam for docks and other flotation devices and prohibit the use of open cell polystyrene in the state's waters. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. Good to hear from you again. Have you submitted your testimony, written testimony as well?
I will do that right after this meeting, yeah.
Okay, great, that will be helpful. And we're because we're running a little behind our usual conversation, but we'll be coming back to it. And yeah, as you were speaking about how plastic moves around more than we might think, I also was realizing that we send it down the Richelieu and out into the Atlantic as well.
Exactly. And that's part of the issue because, you know, the waters flow from those places to us back and forth. So we feel statewide ban and then encouraging through Vermont's leadership, regional bans would make a huge difference. It's so important. Well, you've seen the pictures. It's a mess. And while some inland lakes do not see it, we do see it on other inland lakes. And as they pointed out, the one picture, the loon signs have unencased polystyrene in them, and those loon signs are being used near loon nesting areas. Loon babies possibly, you know, ingesting some of that. So we're very concerned, and we feel very strongly and have supported this from as soon as it was introduced last year. That this is an important ban. And I think the flood resilience part works with flood because we're seeing more and more damage because of the flooding. So I'm hoping that you'll include it and that we'll see it move forward this year. Thank you.
Thank you again, and thanks for coming back in. All right, with that, for people who want a change of topics, we're gonna be returning to Act 250 this morning for the balance of the morning. So if anyone's here just for the polystyrene problems. And out.
We're done.
Painted the dark, okay. Ms. Silverman, were you at the helm when I was on the Lakes Keeper boat like 3 summers ago?
We took you out.
Yeah, I thought it was you, just a little fuzzy, it's like, I think it might have been.
Yeah, no, 2 years ago, 2 summers ago.
We're done and committed, but at some point, who will be giving us pushback?
we're gonna put together that list, Chair Bray asked for that list, and we'll, me and I'll put that together for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more bag.
Take your seat.
Yes, I could use it.
Previous 40.
Start
Release.
And I need to read.
Styrofoam.
Oh, good.
It was put in 1978 or.
Right, so we are moving to, it says Act 250, and that's because when we were drafting the agenda, we didn't have Bill S308 introduced and in hand. But now we do, so that is, just to remind people, Mr. Kowski, did yeoman service taking the Natural Resource Board necessary updates reports and using it as the core of drafting the bill we have for our committee into a proactive posture on doing our best possible work on Act 250. And so we're not doing a bill walkthrough now, but I asked, we will schedule that, but if time allows it, then we may have some time to do a tour of the bill.
It's not short.
For now, because it's so long, I wanted to ask advocates who are in this morning. We shared the bill and said, they are all members of the Natural Resources Board working group that the report that generated the report that the bill is based on. So my ask of them, could you look through it and see where you think we're the language that's drafted or the ideas that's drafted meet the vision we had when we were writing that report, which is of course much higher level. Where there are things you might be of concern, are there things that report had to be closed out 8 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago? Maybe there are things that have come up since, so we're looking sort of for higher level comments from the folks who are thoroughly involved in drafting the report that the bill is based on. So it's an unusual way to get started, but that's how we're getting started. And then just for a bigger picture, I'm not sure exactly how Act 250 housing bills are going to move. As everyone knows, there's things cooking in Senate Economic Development. There's committees in the House that are working on things. And I've been in touch with leadership to help us all coordinate the work we do. So we end up with a strong housing bill that's also a strong smart growth and planning and environmental protection bill at the same time. So that's my preamble. And with that, what do you have? So Mr. Kowski, please.
Can I say, Ellen Chakowski, obviously legislative council, we looked at S308 because I haven't actually formally introduced it. Not all of the pieces line up.
Okay.
So before everyone gets up and says, the growth area designation process conflicts. Yes, it does. And there's a few other places that either have a conflict or a loophole. So the bill is not a final, complete package.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a starting line.
Yes.
Yes, and so thanks for, I had, before our meeting, I asked Mr. Kowski to be with us and participate, like jump in and out as necessary, because it is drafting based on, a high level description. So there's things to be figured out, so you try to write something, like trying to explain something to someone, and then you realize, wait, we didn't quite get everything squared away. So we'll keep on filling things in. So thank you, and again, appreciate you the first cut at a lot of this. I've always noticed a lot, it's become more and more clear as I've worked in this building, and no one likes to write, everyone likes to edit. So I'm just reading one who's willing to write. Okay, so onward and upward. Is Charlie with us this morning, Mr. Baker with us? Or is someone
Still upstairs.
still upstairs? Well, we can be loose on the batting order. Mr. Gregory, that would put you up first, I think, but doing this for you.
Good morning, my name is Peter Gregory, Executive Director of the Two Rivers Ottawa Regional Commission. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for coming.
Yes, very happy to be a resource for everybody. I was just going to kind of rebut what Charlie said, so since. Absolutely not. I want to first of all thank you, Mr. Chairman, about your proactive work on Act 250. I think that's excellent that this committee be at the table from the beginning in a strong way. I also want to thank Ellen for doing an unbelievable job of pulling together different pieces of the NRB reports that the work the regional planning commissions did. And having a good attitude while doing all of that. So high level, I would say that 308 is a great start. It did incorporate NRB report concepts. I was on the committee, as was John Groveman. I think it got into a little bit of detail that might make it a little bit more difficult for communities to actually access the exemptions. I feel as a regional planner in the land use study work that we did, that is the foundation, and that ought to be really the basis for municipalities asking for designations with not a lot of other hoops. Because I fear that if we don't make it a simple path from planning to the NRB exemptions and jurisdiction determinations, we won't have as many communities being participating as we need to.
Sure. And can I interrupt? Sure. I apologize. Then think of this till now. Could you, as a member of the group, I don't want to ask you to like summarize the report, but can you introduce we've had copies of the report. I don't know where everyone is on reading them, digesting them, but if you could maybe just give us a brief introduction to the report, like, and the kind of construct that you came up with. Sure, that would be helpful.
Yes, the report and the direction from the legislature on that report dealt with certain things that are not all that important to me, fees and staffing and things like that. I'll focus in on the interface with planning. So the report identified settled areas that have the infrastructure capacity and local capacity to accommodate more growth. Those were called the Tier 1A. Tier 1B, also settled areas that would be mapped by the regional planning commissions, have less of the attributes to accommodate a lot of growth. They may not have water and sewer, they may not have zoning and subdivision, but yet from a smart growth perspective, we want to encourage more growth there than in the rural areas. So the NRB report defined those two tiers of settled areas. And then a tier 2, which is the bulk of the rest of the land in Vermont, rural working lands, where there could be additional jurisdiction based on a road rule that was agreed on by all members of that committee, and that was a very diverse working group that came to that conclusion. And then a tier 3, which was less fleshed out than other areas of the report. But those were areas where there would be automatic jurisdiction for areas of where resources with statewide significant critical resource areas. I think that this bill refers to that as.
And you didn't create a way to designate those?
No, we did not. I think it's my perspective, and I think the perspective of the study group, the NRB study group, to get direction from the legislature on which resources would be appropriate to map, and then have the regional planning commissions as part of the regional land use map those resources with assistance from the Agency of Natural Resources and their scientists and their data.
And that's possible with the way the bill is written.
I think it could be explained a little bit better. Yeah, no, that needs to be.
Okay,
That needs to be developed.
Yeah.
That's one of those areas that needs to be developed.
It's your sense that we already have the maps that would be required to do that, like in the atlas or other maps, or is like one of our key words for the year so far. I don't know if the maps exist, and it's a question of then using them sort of jurisdictionally.
Well, I think a lot of the data may already exist. I think the regional planning commissions did a mapping exercise based on energy siting a while back where we had constrained areas and we had some of that data. I would defer to the agency and some of my own staff who work with data every day to say, yes, we have this, but we don't. So I think when this committee determines which resources should be mapped and applied to jurisdiction, that's when we ask, do we have this data? Is this possible? Can we map this?
Mr. Chair.
And is the lead on that, John Adams, that's for the state.
He's very good, but
Who else will we got?
somebody over at the agency in Natural Resources, yeah, no.
Chairman?
Thank you, Chair Bray. Just to give you a heads up on where I'm at, just with this bill, I know what the NRB is. I know that's, you can beat me to the punch. The NRB report, I understand what is in that and their recommendations. I have not yet digested how it was translated into this bill. So this is kind of like hearing a review of a book I haven't read, but I've seen a movie. So I am not sure process wise how you would like us to direct like this exact situation where I would like us to have some kind of process or a clearer understanding of how they would designate these tier 3. How would you like us to make those if I notice something that I would like to see in the bill, or I am unsure if it's in the bill, how would you like us to move forward with that? Or are you taking notes and you are capturing?
I would say let's all take notes, like for today, depending on how much time we need to visit all our scheduled witnesses, or we lose Mr. Kowski at 11. So I'm planning to work with her to schedule time to do that. A walkthrough at beginning of next week. So but for today, it was just, or sooner if we can find a time slot. But anyway, so let's just capture ideas, any questions as they come up.
So maybe I could say, Mr. Gregory, you just raised a very important point that I'd love for us to understand. Are you going to have written testimony, and perhaps in your written testimony, could you note that?
Not only that, but other edits to different sections of the bills. Yeah, based on,
So, okay,
yeah,
very helpful.
absolutely.
Okay.
We will be doing that, but of course, it just came about very recently and
This
asked
is
for,
fresh prose kind of.
right, and you asked for kind of a higher level, so
Okay.
I'm resisting getting into,
Then I will,
but that shall be done. I mean, it's essential, it's absolutely.
okay,
Yeah.
probably not,
Do you have a sense, just in terms of these tiers, that percentages of land falls into the tiers, so on a growth level? So we have like a big picture of how it might shake out if you apply the tiers.
I'm not sure I do, obviously the settled areas have not been mapped, but in my back of the envelope, guess would be maybe 10% of the land area.
Would be settled there.
Settled areas, 1A, 1B.
Yeah.
And I'm very open to being corrected by some of that.
Sure.
I think-
Not
6%.
Is it?
Six.
Is it six?
I think-
oh, Windsor County, we've got 10%.
Well, I asked the part because for instance, one of the concerns around designated areas was it's like 40 square miles in state Vermont, I forget it's some 0.something% of. So I have a sense of scale.
Right, no, I think having some sense of scale is really helpful for all of us to get our arms around what's changing and how much area will be impacted. The other big higher level issues that I would raise that we will also be working on with you all and legislative council. It has to do with accountability of the regional planning map preparation, the approval of our regional plan. If the regional plan mapping is going to be the basis for jurisdictional changes or exemptions, it has to be done well. And it has to be approved by a professional body, NRB or ERB. Something with the knowledge and expertise on planning. And then that should be the pathway that should allow for an easier pathway for communities to go through the process. But I want to make sure that, for example, the Two Rivers Board doesn't go rogue and refuse to do something by the deadline, and then it impacts all the communities in the region, and it impacts the whole rollout of the statewide. So there needs to be real accountability and consequences for failure to act. And we would come forward, or at least I would come forward with some suggestions.
And as envisioned, who would be leading the map making efforts that fall to the RPGs? You already do a lot of map making.
We do, it's part of our Title 24 regional plan, we're all required to do regional plans, we're required to do land use mapping and natural resource mapping. So this is just happening on a statewide basis, a consistent statewide basis, and in more detail, because it certainly has more meaning going forward than it has up to this point.
Do the RPCs have the capacity to undertake this additional mapping, or maybe it's reorganizing data you already have? I don't know.
Yeah, no, they do, I mean, the regional plans like municipal plans have an 8-year life, but most RPCs are updating their plans on a much more frequent cycle because of ever-changing conditions on energy or climate and things like that, and housing. So we do have the capacity and the unanimous interest in doing this in a very quick time frame, 18 months. I think we can do this, as this is the foundation for everything else we're talking about. We want to complete this quickly. And sure, some of the timelines that are in here also, I think, can be shortened.
And the details of the mapping work to be done need to be specified in the bill in terms of, for instance, you were talking about defining critical resource areas. So we need a legal definition of the criteria that move an area into that designation.
Yes, because you're policymakers, I would defer to you as to which resources you believe are worthy of protection, and then we, work with those with data and knowledge to map that. We can.
Sure. McCormick?
Are you envisioning the different RPCs coordinating their map making efforts with one another?
Absolutely, yeah. Similar terminology, similar, and some of that I think is in the bill, so that there's consistency in meaning, description, labeling.
To what extent would the result approximate the statewide mapping envisioned in the original Act 250?
I haven't looked at that recently because I see this process completely supplanting the need for anything that even resembles a top-down statewide map imposed on people.
Well, that's actually another way I could have worded it.
That is another way. That's the way I view it. But I think there's a lot of similarity. It talks about the state mapping, talks about mapping areas that are appropriate for more intense development, and then the natural resource area. So it's essentially the same thing, but happening at a sub-state level with municipal participation.
Better late than never.
Yeah. Very late, but yeah, I think this is an exciting time.
And the municipalities, I can't remember everyone who was on the working group. Was there someone from VLTT part of it, or did they provide input as you work? Just wondering if the municipalities are saying, sure, we're happy to be against the idea.
Yeah, there's a board member of the league with on that. So.
You mentioned sort of like a disciplining element, so.
It's very popular with people.
Well, consequences for non-performance, I guess, so can you say a little more? I mean, you're here volunteering to do this, and you've been helping lead, on proposing. Is this just a question of trying to make sure every RPC is on board, and is there a way make sure that everyone pulls together like you're a crew?
Well, we're enabled under state statute, as you know, but we are creatures of our communities. And in latter sections of this bill, I think in the designations study portion of this bill, it talks about all communities losing their benefit incentives under the designations that currently exist if the RPCs don't do their work. I've testified in the past year and in the House that it wouldn't be appropriate as a taxpayer for Two Rivers to be given planning money to do regional plans if they don't in fact produce regional plan. So that is, you know, a certain, it's a stick, I think, would be something I asked you to talk about.
Great. Anything else? I know I interrupted a lot of questions around math and tiers, and thanks for that sort of higher level review of the tiers themselves. So,
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to working with the committee and staff to flesh out some of the areas.
okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That will, morning, Mr. Baker, thanks for coming in. Mr. Gregory had told us he was gonna be contradicting everything you said, so. Starting in the hole, maybe, I don't know.
I will rest my case, what Peter said.
Carlos used to that.
Sorry, for the record, Charlie Baker, Executive Director of the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission and Chair of the Government Relations Committee for our state association. And I had the, I don't know, privilege or something of kind of being the chief cat herder and getting our recommendations together to the legislature this off season.
Right, and just so you know, we haven't done a bill walkthrough yet, which is all like brand new. We haven't done a traditional bill walkthrough with council. So if you want to frame up what you're talking about as well as offering comments that way.
I can do a little bit of that. And first, thank you for incorporating our proposed language to implement our study recommendations in here. I think it starts. No, sorry, no, I lost the page. I had a few minutes ago. We're in the middle, mid-50s. Thank you. And yeah, we're maybe late 40s. Yeah. Sorry, page 47, I think I can see. And so, yeah, I don't want to take any glory away from Alan in walking you through the more detail here, but this is really just kind of walking through the section of statute that governs regional planning commissions. So there's edits to the 4302 planning goals to try to be more consistent with this whole 3-tier concept, with the notion that that residential development would get focused in our downtown villages, center, planned growth areas and village areas. And then we talk about some duties about doing these plans, the purpose of the plan. And there is a whole new process here that, you know, there is, and I'm sorry, Peter, tap me on the shoulder if I'm beating stuff you overstep. But, you know, for kind of a review and approval process for regional plans. That, and I was here when Peter said, you know, we're open for a more professional board of some sort, ERB or NRB to be that review body. And there's a process in there on page, the accountability piece provision that Peter was referencing is on page 62 of your draft, which is the notion that if for some reason NRPC does not fulfill their obligations here under statute, it really, the consequences would be all municipalities losing their benefits on the designations, which is kind of an unfathomable consequence, but purposefully so to say all the towns need to work together with the regional planning commission to make sure that consequence does not occur. And so maybe there's something in between because that's pretty draconian, but
It's holding our own feet to the fire.
yeah, it was really, and trying to kind of create that pressure on municipalities of being part of the process. So that they don't lose any benefits. And then
Can I ask you a little more about this? So, it always takes, you know, you can lead a horse to water, you can drink, sort of thing. So, are you sensing that, this structure, it has a sort of a disciplining feet to the fire piece to it, but that there is already an interest in working together this way because of the pressures felt statewide over, for instance, facilitating development in sort of a new paradigm rather than the traditional airtime with a relatively small number of designated areas.
Yeah, I think when we were thinking about this, I mean, this just feels like a little bit of an evolution of what we do now. As Peter mentioned, we all do regional plans on at least an 8-year cycle now with our communities and involving our communities. So we're not thinking that this is a drastic shift in kind of the process. It may be a shift in how the results are used, but we're all used to, and all the regional plans are required by state statute and have been compliant with having regional plans. So I think this was just kind of a backstop.
Yeah.
Not trying to, and maybe it helps towns pay a little bit more attention or get more engaged, but it's not because we're trying to fix a fundamental issue that they're not engaged now. I think we do have good engagement, by and large, not every town all the time, but the regions do come together, they adopt a plan that seems to work for the towns. So we're talking about evolving that plan as it gets used more significantly in state processes.
And I don't know if I should be asking you this question or someone else amongst the team of folks who are in this morning who all helped write the underlying report. Can you say a little bit about the evolution of Act 250 within the peers, like how someone said, oh, I know the jurisdictional triggers now, and I know what Act 250 does now. How does Act 250 evolve along with the years?
I think the fundamental premise that we were all starting our studies with, right, we had 3 studies going in parallel, was the notion that we could have the regulatory work in Act 250 and the financial incentives that come through designation better support the planning that happens municipally and regionally. And so when I really think about this, I'm like, we're just part of what we're trying to get to is a better integrated system that more supports the planning work. And that's really fundamentally right now, Act 250 is just, I shouldn't say just, it is, it has jurisdictional thresholds, right? 10 units, 10 acres, the elevation, and I'm sure I'm missing half a dozen more. But then it's evaluating impacts. And so the study request at the outset was, can we look at more of a location base? So there's more thought given to where things are happening rather than just how much. Which is kind of indiscriminate, right? Like it could be happening, downtown, it could be happening out in a farm field. We're going to impose Act 250 when you cross these thresholds. So I think it's kind of an evolution of Act 250 to be more thoughtful, and frankly, the plans and all of our work, it wasn't really there when Act 250 got enacted. So the environment in which Act 250 is functioning has evolved. And I think that we're really trying to update it to reflect that evolution. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, part of what I've come to appreciate through this discussion and getting Bill 308 and reading that report is I hadn't really thought of how Act 250 has been fundamentally reactive.
Yeah.
And so even my question, like, what are the jurisdictional? We know the jurisdictional triggers, stuff like that. So I respond, reactive. So I think like getting out of that mode and having a robust planning tool, but invoking it as part of a robust evaluation of impacts like Act 250 can provide. But helping steer ahead of time.
Right. And the big thing, I think that the NRB study did a great job of like kind of, well, we're kind of simplistically, let's go to 3 tiers. Where do we want to have growth? And then the other end of the spectrum, where do we want to discourage it? And then in the middle is still kind of normal. And so the conversation is really at the 2 ends, right? What's in tier 1? Or what kind of process do we have? What does the town need to have done? What does the region need to do to support? having good, infrastructure and bylaws and all the other things that go with getting to an exemption area. Noting that there are gonna be areas that are still subject to Act 250. And then at the other end of the spectrum, and if you read the language that you incorporated here, around the future land use element, on page, page 72, the rural conservation land use area that we talk about here is kind of intended to be that tier 3. We started a little list of like this area may include and listed some resource type things, protected lands, steep slopes, endangered species, wetlands, flood hazard, shoreline. Please highlight that or something. That was just a starting thought.
Yeah.
But we really would appreciate getting some specific, clarity in statute and direction about what resources should we be starting with for tier 3. I think, at least I'll say personally, I'm more worried about having years of debate about what that is. I'm hopeful that you all can provide some, at least some starting direction about what at least should be the minimum thing that's included in tier 3. Because if this section of our map is kind of the foundation of what's in tier 3, we just want to make sure that we have some good direction there.
It's making me think back to the 30 by 30 bill in my ear, like what degree is that kicked off? Map making that's oriented to conservation already, we build on maybe a process that's already underway.
We were very much thinking that same thing. We've already had some preliminary conversations with VHCD, and I think they're going to be very curious. I mean, that could be one simplistic way. I don't know, we haven't really talked about this too much. I mean, maybe it just ties right directly into that. I'm not sure how statutorily to do that. I'm not that familiar with the specific charge, but maybe there's a stronger connection that we made there.
And we were on the water bill, we were looking at
Yes.
Forgetting the exact, I don't know if I've already talked about the watershed maps, they're not quite called that,
The basin planning.
basin planning, thank you.
Yeah.
Like on the basin, we're already doing basin planning work, that is water quality oriented, can we add in a sense of sensitivities around likelihood of flooding or flood damage ultimately?
I think we probably have testified here, or my peers have that same notion. Yeah, and that makes sense. And one of the, and it's really, that is the flood zone or river corridor identification and how that's going to be used is a critical piece. I'm sorry, that's actually what held me up, because got into a conversation, house environment about, okay, you got a planned growth area. Almost all of them are along a river. Sorry, that Montpelier.
Where we're going.
Yeah, right. Name your town, right? Almost all of them. And how are we treating that in our future land use map? And how is it regulated? And I think that's also a policy area that would be great to get a little clarity about. Should our map kind of have that corridor excluded from the growth area, or is it just acknowledge that there's a regulatory regime that is kicking in? Right, like we don't try to map when we're talking about a zoning, a growth area in our land use plan as a town or a region, say, oh yeah, this is a residential area, medium density, but we don't necessarily try to map out every single resource that might need a permit, like, oh, maybe there's a corner of the property, we don't map that out of them. So which I don't know, maybe it's not great practice, but that's just kind of historically, we've spent a little more general mapping than specific mapping. And so I think the one question is, how specific do you want us to be in terms of trying to exclude those river corridors from our growth area mapping?
Right, so that, right, I mean, you're pointing out there's a complete connection to the work we're doing at 213.
Amen.
If we're gonna call something,
And
there's
there's
a
a,
river would certainly be a critical resource, you know.
yeah,
So,
we do make a reference to that at the bottom of page 68, that what this draft right now does say in the planned growth areas that the area would exclude identified flood hazard and fluvial erosion areas. But, yeah, just because there is a connection there with 213 to just kind of make sure that that lines up.
well, I was saying before, like the theme of the year seems to be mapping. I mean, over and over again, like, where it's slowing down a little bit to do better work for the long haul by strategic mapping.
And housing and flooding, yeah.
Senator McCormick,
And how long would the chair like to say? Because no, because I have probably like hours worth.
Yeah.
Which I know we don't have now, so I can restructure the way I have.
since we're doing the 40,000, not 60 foot.
Okay, how to brief as possible.
Cruise,
Okay.
let's say 40,000 feet if we can.
Okay, first question basically, on the downtown narrative, the idea. If the municipality is taking care of certain issues, that then they get an exemption from Act 250. Is it your view that if the municipality has addressed the various things that get them the exemption? If they didn't have an exemption, if they were going for an Act 250 permit, would those same steps qualify for the Act 250 permit?
You mean like for an individual property owner?
That's where it gets, okay, I'm envisioning the idea of a municipality getting a master permit,
Yeah.
like an industrial park does. Okay, and then you have an Act 250 permit that addresses various criteria. And the individual project then applies for an amendment to that permit.
Yes.
And that amendment is based on those areas that are not covered by the master plan.
That would be a different tactic.
It would be.
Yeah, I think what was envisioned here was that they've done all the work to meet all the criteria. So, we don't need Act 250 to review because we trust the community to regulate themselves. Like really. That's kind of the fundamental principle here. Because they've documented that they've done all the work, they have good bylaws, they've got the infrastructure capacity, they protected their floodplain, you know.
But because they've done all the work, they could get an Act 250.
They wouldn't have to get an Act 250, they would be.
No, you're envisioning, I'm envisioning that they would.
Gotcha.
And I'm wondering what's the difference, if it's a distinction without a difference.
If you think of the approval of the exemption of saying, hey, you did all this great work, congratulations. I think the difference is what happens in subsequently. You know, every property owner need to not just get their municipal permit, but then also go to, you know, the district commission for their Act 250 permit. And that's I think some of the rub that we're trying to make it. And frankly, and I've been doing land use regulation for 25 years or so, and with a good 10 years outside of Vermont before moving here. And I think we're trying to get the regulations updated to better support the planning. So, and the regulatory work that the towns have done so that we're not wasting energy and creating, even if it's just, you know, a little bit of time and money, any barriers to producing housing in the right places. And I think that's where we were kind of coming from, trying to reduce any barriers to getting housing where we have infrastructure, where the community has its zoning and all that.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do with the idea of a master permit. At 40,000 feet, I'll leave it for now.
Yeah.
Okay, I would hope that discussion will revisit that question. Second question, the tier 3.
Yes.
What are we talking about in terms of acreage? What gets you into tier 3?
Thank you.
Okay,
That is exactly my question.
and what made it?
So, but we'll try to be more constructive than that. So, I can tell you that when we did, you may remember, I can't remember when we were required to do the energy plan. Was that 17?
Yeah, so 6, 7 years ago, the legislature required us to do regional energy plans.
Yeah,
And identify areas that were appropriate or not for renewable energy projects. As part of that process, we worked with A&R and the Department of Public Service, and they gave us a list of what they called state no constraints. That said, hey, these are areas where really no renewable energy project should be happening, and frankly, no development period should be happening. And I have that list somewhere, not in front of me at the moment, but there were wetlands, river corridors, vernal pools. I can't remember, there's a couple more. They total, if you just look at those known constraints, they were 18% of the state's land area. So, that is a potential starting place because we've already done the mapping. And we've already had those conversations with our communities about these are places that we should try to avoid development. And that's why I've been thinking about tier 3. We're really trying to send a signal to property owners like, you're gonna have to go through, there's a lower bar that is gonna trigger Act 250. So it's a little discouraging regulatory policy, right? So that's a starting place. There are obviously a lot more resources that have been identified by A&R over the years that could be in tier 3, and that is kind of the question I think of like, and that's just what I meant by saying we'd appreciate some clear direction about which resources will be part of that.
this is being sold as sort of a quid pro quo, right? More and easier development here, right, in exchange for more protection there. And I want us to what are we getting for our,
Yeah.
okay, bring this up, what are you getting back? And then most of the state is still in that middle area.
Right, you started with the 18%, and again, back to the 30 by 30, 50 by 50 law that got passed a year or two ago, like, maybe there's a tie-in there. That would obviously take you to 30% or 50%, right? So, yes.
So, one thing we're talking about, I know the word exemption is anathema, so, sometimes I think it would be like, we could talk about an alternative planning scheme as opposed to just an Act 250 exemption. Because, honestly, I'm not trying to spin it, but that we've been talking for several years about if you had robust planning at another level outside of Act 250, then good planning is good planning, and we don't necessarily need to regard it as an exemption so much as using an alternate scheme. Maybe I shouldn't use the word scheme, alternate strategy.
Quid pro quo, they probably shouldn't do.
Well, I just wanna not fall into what, that we're just horse trading, like that we're giving up something in order to get something. I would like to think that we're gaining on both sides.
That's right. I think that is the intent, and I think we kind of view this as an evolution, like this is actually not a new concept, right? We've been having neighborhood development areas and downtowns that allow priority housing projects in certain areas. I think it's more a question of where we have Act 250 was set up as an environmental protection law. Where should we most effectively deploy those regulatory resources to accomplish our objectives? And I think that's really kind of the question of like, if, and we've already gone down this road. This is just an evolution of like, if a municipality has done all the good work. And right now, I think we have, Chris knows better, maybe 20 neighborhood development areas.
17?
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, let me exaggerate, I apologize. But they're the communities with more capacity, and I think that's ultimately, we're trying to encourage good work at the local level. And that's how we've been viewing this, of trying to encourage good planning and thoughtful regulation at the local level to achieve like our housing objectives and the community building objectives and strengthening our villages. Frankly, the majority of the state from a land area is losing population and villages are hurting. How do we provide some system change that kind of supports reinvestment in our villages and downtowns that really helps them thrive? And I think that's really what we're talking about in evolution, so thank you for, I won't use that X word again.
Well, no, I mean, I'm sure I'll use it again myself, but I'm not, again, I'm not interested in spinning something, I'm really interested in aiming for doing better on both sides.
I have really looked at this as really trying to strengthen the state support for implementing local plans and regional plans. So, and just there is no connection between Act 250 and our plan where we accept criterion 10, so which is almost kind of like, and does it comply with your plan or not at the end? And so making a more location-based regulatory system actually does help support the work, whether it's the conservation side of the work the state has been doing for years, of like trying to protect resources, or in the community building side, of like, how do we promote development in those places that make sense.
There are Watson, Benson, White.
Thank you. I love this framing of it as the shift from limiting how much growth through thresholds to location based with incentivizing the kinds of activity we want in those areas. I love that. It is not lost on me that this is a big deal, that changing Act 250 is huge. It would be huge for Vermont to do what is envisioned here. And so this is not a question. I just want to express this as a concern, maybe. Just knowing how weathered Act 250 is, in terms of like all these phrases have been tested in court, right? And that it is very robust in that way. I guess because of the weight of this proposal, and the fact that like there are aspects of it that are yet to be fleshed out, that need more attention.
Yeah.
My concern is that we're going to do our best here, and just want to acknowledge like there may be places that we have done our best and may need to still be worked on. And I just want to acknowledge that I'm feeling that tension about like, I feel like we could spend this whole session, like getting the details of this, like really fun.
From here to the middle of May.
Right, and that's not what we have. But, so I just want to express that as like, that's a thing I'm feeling. The weight of this change.
Constructive suggestion to follow. I think it'd be helpful to have some reporting mechanism. Because I mean, public policy work, and you know better than I do, like it's never perfect.
Right.
You gotta evaluate it, constantly or regularly at least. So some reporting back for you to see how things are working, because I've been doing land use regulations and stuff for a long time. Never seen the part of it that we didn't need to tweak. But that was an issue we're doing. And so.
Right, and that would probably be true even if we did, get all.
95% right,
Right, it's still gonna need
Yep.
attention and.
Yeah, I don't know if you want me to, I'll say one thing that I hope gets discussed is what the effective dates on some of these things should be. I think you need to think strategically about the layering in these decisions, because a lot of them will take time. The physical processes to not only develop the processes, but get them up and running. And so this bill has some effective dates that are staggered, but I think you could really think about the timeline of rolling out what could be big changes depending on how many changes you decide to make.
And we, along with the NRB and PHCP, will have some suggestions for you soon.
Great.
I think we're wrestling about that.
Very.
Well, it's great, this, because we're talking about big changes like N213 as well, I keep seeing the practical path to address sort of the anxiety and concern around, wait, this is complicated and how well can we do it in 8 weeks or something like that, to your point about effective dates, like a time, just like in 213, we're trying to build a timeline, and it's providing clarity as well as the practical value of letting us see that it's feasible if we chunk it out and sequence it right. So that as long as we're off the right foot, then I'm less anxious about having sort of got it all right
Yeah.
at the beginning.
Thank you.
Consider what you've been waiting only about 28 minutes.
Don't worry, Mr. Chair. I just want to make one point, which is the NRB did not make a recommendation on tier 3 process. And I respect that you may have individual perspectives from your vantage points, but I just want to be clear, we don't have a recommendation on that. My personal feelings, if we were to make decisions about that as a committee, would be that we start with not redoing all of the already pre-designated, like the waters, the obvious ones that we, if we can, we start from that basis and then add on additional ones. I just don't want us to create a process. And I don't think we have a recommendation from the NRB that directs us one way or the other, because it was a wide varied stakeholder group. But my personal perspective is, I do not want us to have a situation where you basically have to petition to get something into tier 3. And then every community member I know is gonna tell me about this one specific spot that they feel did or did not get entered into tier 3. That's my big fear, and I'm just wondering if you have any, from the point of RPCs. And I know it's a package deal. But do you have any reflections on a process that you think would work for tier 3 from your position? Knowing that, and you don't have to give a recommendation, because I know that you all came together and chose not to speak on certain things.
With your topics, so
I guess, so personally, I think I have been floating the notion of starting with the known criteria from the energy planning work, just because we've done it. But there are some other thoughts. I don't know that does a great job of addressing like forest fragmentation, right? Which is one of the reasons I think that even this conversation has kind of had some roots in. So there may be some thought, and I think that's why I was like, some more guidance from the legislature would be good, but I will also share this experience, and I know it's Kidney County and it's really close to Vermont, but when we did our energy work, we did work to map out, our towns have done a lot more regulation of natural resource areas. And so there was, we did state constraints, and then we did what the state called regional and local constraints. If you look at our energy map, you will see a lot of green area on that map, which has already been regulated out of development by our municipalities. And so, I am really not worried about this debate in my region, because I think we already had the conversation has happened in 20 different towns over the last 30 years, and we're in a pretty good place, I think. Maybe there's something that needs to be adjusted, depending on where the direction lands, but I think we're in a pretty good place. And I think, some regions did more, some did less on that. But I don't know, I'm not as scared of the conversation, even though it seems scary. And I think if you looked at our energy plans, you would see, I think even more than that 18% has been mapped as areas of, to kind of stay away from. And if you look at the guidance we were given for that, it wasn't just about renewable energy projects. It said, if you're gonna say this, you can't go there, that means nothing can go there. We can't, no houses, no gas stations, no anything, right? So anyway, maybe we should talk with a little bit more about that, or we can also do some, You know, maybe we could even show you what that map looks like, aggregated,
Sure.
I think that my point is more that I respect that we did not get a recommendation from the NRB group on this, how do we formulate it? How do we create tier three? I do think that's a very important decision that we as a committee will make. And I hope that we err on the side of auto inclusion for a lot of the stuff that has already been kind of kicked out. To avoid the same exact issues that we have heard historically from constituents around Act 250, which is this idea that there's a long process. And that's a claim that you can debate, but I don't want us to create another system that brings up the same concerns with our natural resources, so. So thank you, and I may ask this question to the other stakeholders as well, who have different perspectives on it. Maybe if there should be so much auto included.
I just scared a bunch of people, but only because they're not familiar with our maps, like, it's some of the process that's happened, so. I'm happy to follow up with that.
Yeah, so you were recommending A&R, so who at A&R would we, do you work with or would recommend?
Billy Coster is probably most familiar with the energy mapping work. But I'm not sure how familiar he is with the outcome of it.
Yeah,
Um,
but we can reach out and they always know who, but they do their own picking, who can come anyway, so.
Yeah.
Right, well, although you're still in chair, so Mr. Gregory, you live in another region. Significantly different than Chittenden County. So when you hear Mr. Baker talking about how their energy makes are bringing a pretty good way to bootstrap the mapping process. How does that fit for your region?
Peter Gregory, Two Rivers. I think that's a very good place to start. I'd still like this committee's blessing of it, and the forest fragmentation issue is not something that was really part of that effort at all. It was not a goal, it was not a thought. And that in my region is really, really important, part of this conversation, forest fragmentation and habitat connectors. But yes, absolutely, let's build on existing work. We haven't had those discussions, it was a long time ago, so it'll require yet another robust discussion with our communities and our board members and stuff, and I'm anxious to begin that as soon as possible. Because, I do a good job of explaining what we're doing and what its ramifications are.
Yeah.
It's a great flavor. I'm forgetting the right name of this map as well. It was, we had a great hearing in room 11, it's be like 4 years ago now, with it was about Vermont as a part of a habitat corridor for the whole eastern seaboard, and I forget what that, you remember that's the name of that? Mike Snyder was very informative.
It was in Nature Conservancy's migration, something.
But, okay, so
Sounds right.
just they were.
and then there's so much mapping of resources, it does get overwhelming quickly, and so, so we'll try to do some take a couple cracks at it, maybe coordinate a little bit with Billy.
Okay, that'd be great, because I'm thinking about as when we talk about it as a resource, also sometimes I just keep reminding myself to think about it as a, the place where other things live as habitat, or, and then it has also becomes a much more live place, not just a set of sort of geological features or something like that.
Amen.
Okay, anything else for you, Mr. Baker? Okay, great. Any other committee questions? Chair McDowell,
Wheels are turning.
I have a few things this week I've said are the things not to be mentioned, and I have questions about those, but then I'd be breaking my one.
Your oath of not missing black on the spot, okay, let's move right on.
Another one is, what does, as town sewer mean? And what does have town sewer not mean? When we deal with issues like these.
I think there's a question underneath there. Please, there's a question underneath, but let's get to the point and save us a little time. TSO, are we going to be encouraging development in areas that have CSO?
We are right now.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at neighborhood development areas in Burlington, those just got some more exemptions or trying to encourage housing. I hear that issue, I understand some of it, and. I do think that is worthy of conversation, is the municipality on track to get the CSOs addressed?
I don't hear that conversation.
That you should ask the A&R regulators, I'm not involved directly, in that pipeline, but
Well,
Are-
we want to be if this is what we're talking about.
yeah. And. Right, and we also get into conversation when we talk about like sewer capacity. We talked, and there's some metric that I don't know if I have fully fresh in my mind about capacity limits. Because what's happening with the CSO is it's not the wastewater that's the issue, right? It's the fact that they have stormwater that's going into the wastewater system that in those peak storms is causing overflow. And so.
What does overflow mean? You've got
Oh,
rainwater and wastewater sewage. And they're combining, and what's happening?
yeah, to my understanding, they are often released directly into wherever the sewer releases, whether it's a river or
Okay,
in the case of Burlington, Lake Champlain, right?
we don't like to say that, so.
Oh, no, there's. I mean, yeah, the stuff going into Lake Champlain.
We call it stuff.
Yeah, well.
Ross, how about
I mean, like,
untreated.
untreated wastewater.
Wastewater.
And we're premising the exemption from Act 250 on the grounds that we've looked at this, we've mapped it, and we have taken care of it. And it's good to go, and then we include stuff that ain't good to go.
Yeah, no, I don't wanna diminish the need to take care of those CSO issues.
When we say it's okay to build there because it has been taken care of and it's granted an exemption, we're doing what you just said you don't like to do. So
Agreed.
what do we do?
Well, one thing is we can take more testimony and.
Well,
And Senator Watson, you have experience with
it's,
this.
we take more testimony and the system of testimony is overwhelmed and overflowing.
So, so my understanding of the limiting factor of eliminating CSO locations is money. If we were to put more money into disconnecting them, because they're very expensive, then that process would happen more quickly. So perhaps one thing we could consider is putting in some money into this bill or some other bill specifically to go towards the further elimination of CSO locations. Because I can speak, at least for this, on behalf of the city of Montpelier, from my experience, that they are every year putting some portion of their budget towards this very thing. And if they had more money, they would do more.
Well, yeah, we had a discussion about
There's
that.
a solution,
We had a discussion about that yesterday.
and
That
so,
in order to do proper planning, it takes more money, and
so are you suggesting that we ought to add more money for CSO disconnection?
you don't get something for free.
Okay, it sounds like you're making a suggestion then.
I've been suggesting that for years.
Kind of.
And the response is,
Yeah.
it's expensive, we'll just let it go through
No,
the rivers. In the interests of building in certain places to preserve the environment.
Yeah, maybe we should work on some draft language.
Okay,
All right, so it sounds like I'm teasing you, but I'm not. Thank you for bringing it up again, because it's something that we dip into. And then we go on, and I know there's an ongoing effort. And if A&R were here, they could recite how many CSO outlets have been addressed, resolved, reduced.
Yeah, the
We
work is underway.
spent a whole day on it up at the Echo Center like 5-6 years ago. And we could see there's this long timeline. There were hundreds of millions of dollars to get to
Let me respond.
under our own weather conditions.
And thank you for allowing me to bring it up. And now that it's been brought up, we're about ready to head back down the path that we're on, so.
Well, I know you won't let us just lose track of it, so that's good.
Senator McDonald touched on this issue of the stormwater being mixed. I thought you were going someplace else with that, and you didn't, so I'm going to, which is the question had to do in this discussion with the idea that a municipality would be exempt from Act 250 if it has a sewer facility. Oh, no, that's one of the requirements, yeah. And the question is, if the sewer facility in question is dumping raw sewage into the river, does that qualify
Yes.
for an Act 250
I think,
exemption, and should it?
I mean, that's.
I mean, because if that was what the actual topic here is Act 250 and Act 250 exemptions. And so I want to just focus on that, that the idea is, well, everything is fine because the municipality has various kinds of.
You just asked the question, does it qualify for an Act 250 exemption?
It does, and then the question is, do we want that to be the case?
Is there what we're,
That's what we're just.
that's what we have prepared, that's what we are wish to go into law, is that.
Well, I think it's the question before this committee is, do we conclude that it should go into law?
No. No shoulds.
Oh, no, that's what we do, then, we're the legislature, right? That's what
Well,
we
we
do.
should, we say,
I don't say
no, we don't say shall.
Once again, just like a toilet bowl.
It's saying you're here, I don't say shall.
Shuffling motion that.
I'm hoping if you
Hold on,
use that
hold on.
language, I'd love to.
We're gonna proceed. So thanks, let's work on it. We already have people volunteering to think about drafting language. I've buried my copy of that. There we go. Mr. Groveman, you are next on our.
I was texting with my colleague, Mr. Cochran, and they had, Mr. Cochran and Mr. Hammer, they have the lead 11, is that correct? So I'm happy to let them go first if you want.
We could try to tell you what you need to know in 10 minutes,
Or if you want.
or should we come back later?
Yeah, I didn't realize you had a time constraint. Yeah, please, let's,
I'm very anxious to speak, just sitting here, remembering the words, but I usually hear if they.
Yeah.
You did it in 10 minutes, you know.
We do need probably more than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
yeah, and you go someplace like, I didn't know that you needed.
I tried to tell that we're having a meeting on the zoning atlas, speaking of maps, in which we'll create a statewide kind of land, map of visit development intensity. So we've been wanting to work on this project, get this thing going. So,
So please nice for the time we have, and then we'll have you back.
okay.
Jacob, yeah. Yeah, and for anyone, if you have time constraints, we get it, where you have other things to do, if you let us know ahead of time, we can always juggle that and put it.
I understand we're not the most important meeting.
You are the most important. This was just a hard meeting to set up. So thank you, John, for your time. My name is Chris Cochran. I'm the Director of Community Planning and Revitalization. So I'm with
Jacob Everett, the Community Planning Policy Manager in the Department of Housing and Community Development.
Thank you both for coming in.
Thank you for having us. The focus of our work is really smart growth and land use. And we support and enhance kind of the work of many of our sister agencies and departments. And our regional planning efforts and our local planners, and how we create compact vital centers. Our work is kind of interesting because it's intersectional. We kind of do a little bit of A&R, we do a little bit of V-Trans, we do a little bit of historic preservation, economic development. So we have a unique basket of programs, everything from EVSE to fixing up old buildings, because these are all things we want to see in our centers. For better or for worse, kind of aligning the different agency programs and priorities is not easy, but this is what municipalities have to do when they make their community vital. They've got to take these streams and stack them up. So I jokingly call our division, sometimes we probably shouldn't say it, but the Department of Correction. So we try to correct mistakes to improve how the process works. It is a fun job, it's an interesting job. The chair asked us late to just come in and talk briefly about the bill. I do want to thank Ellen for taking on drafts and cleaning it up. We do have a few more changes, but I think given the amount of time we have, it may be more helpful to just kind of tell you about our study. There were 3 studies. The NRB did a study on their program. The RPCs did a study on the future land use maps. And we did a big study on our state designation programs. Brief history, there's 5 different designation programs. They were started around 1999, 2000 with the downtown designation. They were added over time. They weren't always aligned well with one another. It's been on our wish list for many years to figure out how we can pull these programs together to align them, support a range of values from economic development, community vitality, to climate adaptation, resilience, to housing. They all need to come together. Our programs were not always working as well as they could together.
Was the driver for many of the designations to create, tax benefits? We have that in order to spur development, but that goes.
Initially, absolutely. I mean, the initial goal of the program is community revitalization. The most valued benefit, as I mentioned in the other committee, of the designations is our downtown resident tax credit for fixed utility programs. The other benefit that is most valued is reactively jubilee for these centers. These come together to help places that we want to see development happen more quickly and more efficiently. But Act 182 of 2022 asked us to hire consultants to step back and look at our designation programs and look at how we can simplify them, look at how we can use them as a recognize these places as places that we want us to grow, and look at them in an overall framework, place-based economic development or place-based jurisdiction, however you phrase it. I think they're the same things. We hired a consultant called Smart Growth America. They're a Washington DC consultancy as well, with somebody from your district, a group called Community Workshop, from Echo, I think. To do an independent kind of top-down review of our programs, make recommendations on how we can improve, but we started with listening with a lot of people. It was a really compressed timeline. We got it all done in like 6 months. But we heard from over 500 different groups and individuals, over 120 communities. We held a big statewide summit in Randolph to engage with people on their vision of what they want their centers to be. And oh, Jacob, I'm gonna need 5 minutes. The event in Randolph was excellent. We got a very diverse group from everybody from Beaufort to the NRC to Vermont Chamber of Commerce, everybody in between.
This was over the summer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this was, you held them during a weekday.
Yeah, you're working.
Yeah,
But we got a good representative, senators did show up as well as House members, so it was a really terrific meeting, and really kind of gold standard level of engagement. When he was like, what do you want these to be? So we took those recommendations to heart. And that is kind of the summary documents that Jacob was sharing around. There's an 8-page executive summary of kind of what we heard and what people wanted us to do. And Jacob was actually going to get detailed recommendations, but it was really great to see that Vermonters do value these designation programs. They really, really do. They value the benefits that I mentioned, the tax credits and the Act 250 recognition. However, many communities find it difficult to access the layers of different designations that don't comport well with each other. There's a lot of sophistication in some of them. We would like, what community said is that this one they're doing easier. So our touchdown is that easy button. We want to make this easier. And to your point, how do we make designation automatic? And how do we just look at places? They're there. Why do we have to go through a process? So Jacob's going to talk more about these in a second, but it will make it a lot easier to get these designations. It will make it a lot easier for communities to qualify for these benefits. And I think communities really need the legislature to act on housing, on climate action. And if we can identify these areas and align the benefit package to support the types of development or adaptation and changes we need, I think we can set ourselves up for success in the long run.
Can you just say briefly how the designations will the role they play sort of mechanically programmed in this overall, tier scheme, like if you're.
We have a lovely chart for you.
Yeah.
That's
probably a better way.
Yeah, the designated centers would be tier 1 and tier, so 1B. And that's.
Tier 1 and 1.
Yeah.
But I think big picture, Chair Brian, is that all three reports, as Charlotte mentioned, have a real focus on location-based planning and policy framework, both for investments in migrant centers and for regulatory use. And in the state designation program, we currently have 5 designations over 25 years. It was time for a health checkup. Okay. And that's what we did over the summer and worked to coordinate these concepts into place-based recognition. On the state designation concept, is taking those 5 designations and really turning them into 3. One focused on our downtowns and villages, our traditional historic civic and commercial cores, as well as those we've recognized along the way, and neighborhoods. So the areas that surround those compact centers. And then the third one is how these centers and neighborhoods could interface with Act 250 jurisdiction or other possible regulatory recognition, whether it be fee recognition, presumptions of compliance, thinking about the context of a compact settlement and how that might be different within regulatory programs and outside. So that's the overall way that this is kind of coming together.
The only thing that makes me a little nervous, I appreciate charts, very helpful. The only thing that makes me a little nervous is tier 3, it's a little smidgen in implemented, but I know it's not
The
representative.
scale is not representative. Your mileage may vary.
Okay, great. And I know you need to take off, so we can, we'll be working on this, for weeks to come, and so we'll try to schedule it back in. So but you mentioned language changes, so if you can send changes, for the time being, to me and to Ellen, and if anyone wants to see them, we're happy to circulate them, but for, we're just sort of creating an inbox for feedback first, and then I think we're not at an editing stage yet, like we're still on the learning things, but if you're catching things now, great, might as well start.
What's easiest, is it easiest if we mark up the bill, edits, or just come up with a list of changes?
Probably mixed with it too.
Yeah, I don't think
We can work with Ellen on that. We can do
Yeah,
that.
just
I want to make it as easy as first possible.
thank you, I think we appreciate that. Okay, anything else before you?
I just, we worked incredibly hard with our partners, our VC partners and we partners to make sure that things are pointing in the same direction to make, this is a big change. And to your point, we do need to just pass this framework, and it will take time to implement. And we're beginning to have our conversations on what, to your point, former project manager, what are the tasks, who's doing them, and when do they need to happen? I think that's a piece that we're working on now, what could help inform your next steps. You need to be confident that you know how all this is going to lay out.
So for the current designations, are you planning on like a transition program?
Absolutely.
And my only question was going to be, so we are very fortunate where I'm from. I mean, I'm from Hartford, 5 villages. We got the whole, we overlap on every possible, we've spoken to you
You've got
quite a bit.
designation.
Yeah, we've got it all. And I feel like we were on the forefront of it, but again, bias. Do you feel like there are things we have in the bill or that we need to add to the bill that support municipalities as we make these changes? That's my main concern, because whatever we do, even if it ultimately has a better outcome, the transition time period, that effective dates conversation is gonna have a big impact. I'm wondering if you had any thoughts out of the gate, or if that's something you would be willing to give us information on, because I just don't want to set us up as you work with these folks for positive changes to become bogged down with just the overwhelming amount of changes in the timeline.
So envision the change, so communities don't lose that, so essentially best, we're not gonna lose anything. Where there's some discussion about the amount of time that's needed to implement a system change. Municipalities always need technical assistance and support. So that's.
We don't all have Lori Kirschfield.
No, and it's our small towns that we really, your town did a great job with designation programs, saying, oh, we got these like poster children, Montpelier, they have a capacity that the smaller towns don't, and that's something that. In the recommendations, the consultants, you really need to practice that, figuring out how you can actually provide more meaningful levels of service to our smaller towns. And we do have ideas on that, but I think that's in our mind a further, there's a lot of people who work in the space and coordinating and building consensus on around how do we integrate and provide better technical assistance, wraparound services to our small towns. Is something that municipalities don't need to.
And do you feel like at least how it is now, we're not ripping a Band-Aid off and causing harm?
I think what we're doing is trying to signal, here's the direction we'd like to come, here's the steps that we need to take. And if people know kind of how this is shaping out, they'll know how to engage in the process, and like, you eventually, we can check in with you, like right track, wrong track, or boy, we thought this was a really good idea, but then it turned out it's not the best approach, so.
I think the committee will see considerable thought has been put into the transition period to make sure that it's smooth for municipalities, that there's no loss in benefits, that there's a clear path for existing designations to transition into a new framework. And but to Ellen's point, the timelines between those three reports are a little bit different. The RPCs are signaling that they're ready to move faster than maybe we had initially thought they would. So those dates can sync up.
And something I'd like to flag for us to come back to in this short time is the rural towns that, Mr. Baker was pointing out are being depopulated.
Yeah.
So it's just a little hard for me to imagine how a town that's probably struggling a little harder just because so many things require volunteer efforts. If your town's in sort of a losing people mode, who's around and what kind of energy is there for flipping things and going the other direction?
States have great models, there's as rural as we are, and they're finding ways to tackle this, but it will take collaborative efforts, different groups have different skills and proficiencies, and I think it's just figuring out how do we get everybody rolling in the same direction, and targeting these investments. I think there's some good models within the state, which really help our small towns, V-Trans is like an automatic procurement thing, so towns don't have to go through the process, you're already selected, you can just go. Several of our programs were intimately involved in project development, so they're getting that support when they do their projects. A lot of times we offer grants and we're like, good luck, congratulations, go figure it out. And that may work great in larger capacity towns, but it's not the best position.
Right, and I don't even imply in any way, like, the smaller towns are just struggling, it's just, you run out of people to do things.
Yeah, no, we have a, 18th century government and that relies on volunteers, and it's not the 18th century anymore. Yes.
All right, okay, so thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you, and I'm sorry this was rushed, but we'd love to come back. The full report, if you're, behave yourself, is really long.
Can you see one more? I passed, I know I have one, but not right here.
I can leave this with you and I'll send it to Jude, so you can post.
Oh, no, I mean, like the executive summary.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
It's just one.
Yeah, there's a wallet size summary too. You can put it in your pocket. Yeah, it's on your website.
Yeah, you did a great job. This is one of the best executive summary documents I've seen. Sometimes they're just not clear. So thank you to consultant. They're from, you said Bethel?
Bethel,
Where's that now?
Rebecca Sanborn Stone.
Oh, she did.
Okay. I didn't know that was how she was doing business.
Yeah, she did a great job with the public engagement. She did a lot of the graphics.
Yeah.
I mean, as they went from.
Yes. Mr. Cochran, Mr. Hamrick, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for letting us go more to discuss.
Oh, okay. Again,
We've been here for 2 hours and 5 minutes straight, so let's take a 15-minute break and then we will.